Good evening and a very warm welcome to you all, both here in the room and joining us online for the 2025 Chatham House Prize, voted for by Chatham House members. This year, the prize will be awarded to Sudan's grassroots mutual aid groups, the emergency response rooms. A quick reminder that this event is on the record, being recorded and live streamed. This evening is not only about recognising the extraordinary work, but about engaging more deeply with the context and challenges behind it. We are therefore very pleased to begin with a panel discussion exploring what has become a vital humanitarian lifeline in Sudan. I'm delighted to hand over to Zainab Badawi, our chair, and the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, and good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and any excellencies who might be lurking somewhere in the audience. I can't identify you, but hello as well. So we are conducting this conversation at a grim anniversary coming up for the people of Sudan and indeed the whole continent of Africa and indeed the whole world. 3 years since this ghastly conflict broke out. That will be on April the 15th. But as is often the case, human endeavour can also be a source of great inspiration and courage. So we are also here to celebrate the bravery, the courage and the camaraderie that the people of Sudan have displayed towards their fellow civilians, those who have suffered a great deal in this conflict. And we are very happy to have two of these representatives of the emergency response rooms who are, of course, due to receive the Chatham House Prize a little later after this panel. And we're also delighted to have with us Ahmed Suleiman from Chatham House, who's the Senior Research Fellow in the Africa Programme, the Labour MP, Annalisa Dodds, who chairs the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Sudan, and our two representatives who are the coordination officers. They've got a myriad of titles, but I would just say Ala Hassan is based in North Kordofan, where she's the coordinator, the external communications coordinator for the ERR in Kordofan and based in North Kordofan, but she really has an overview of what's going on in the whole country. And also Sanusi Adam is the external coordinator for the ERRs and is a volunteer and has been spearheading the efforts of the ERRs right from the start. So we salute you both, and let me just start. Ala is going to be speaking in Arabic, so for those of you who don't understand Arabic, there are some headphones there which will have simultaneous interpretation. Depending on the level and sophistication of her Arabic, I may or may not need these myself. But let us see. I was born in the Sudan, but I've lived here since I was 2 years of age. So I speak Arabic like a 7-year-old. So I'm sure Allah's Arabic is much more elevated than that. So let's just see. But Sanusi is going to speak in English. So Sanusi, congratulations in advance for the award you're going to be collecting. Just give us an overview of where we are in Sudan, because of course journalists find it very difficult to operate inside the country. We hear reports coming in and out, and of course there's a great deal of misinformation and disinformation, but we're all very saddened to hear about the latest attack on the hospital in Darfur a few days ago in which 70 people died. But just give us an overview, because you hear some people sort of saying, well, life has returned to normal in parts of Khartoum, Omdurman, and you know, the north of Sudan is all right and so on. So what's it like?
I mean, I think there's always a bit of, you know, reality to what we hear, but our assessment shows that we're living in an era right now where there's 3 levels of, you know, of this disaster in Sudan that unfolded. We have states that have just entered, you know, the front line, and they became the front line on where all the fighting and all the drone attacks are happening. We have semi-stable states adjacent to these states, also receiving flux of internally displaced people seeking refuge there, and we have what we call the safe states. These are either former states that had the war and now there's no actual fighting happening, or either state that never, experience any ground offense. So either drone attacks here and there on infrastructure and on civilians and stuff like that. So this is what the situation is. The needs are actually getting greater and greater every day. After that campaign of everything is safe and people should go back, I think a number of people tried to go back, and the number of refugees came down from 13 million to 10 million. I think, but right now there's another wave of attack in the Kordofans, north, west, and south, as well as in Blue Nile, and this is actually resulting in new waves of IDPs kind of flocking these, center states and the eastern states. Humanitarian situation has always been bad in Sudan, and now it's getting really worse, with getting really few attentions internationally. Response has been, I would say maybe less than 7, 8, maybe 10% of the needs being covered in some areas. We're seeing the number of civilian casualties rises every other week. As you also mentioned, the last attack on the hospital, 73 casualties. Before that, there was an attack on a nursery with 71 people. Actually, 120 people died because it was a double tap. The first one was 71 person, and then the second one was about 60 people died. So it's just, we're seeing this recurrent number of civilians fallen, and we see really little action to actually stop or end this suffering that our people have been going through for nearly 3 years right now.
Thank you. Ala, just give us perhaps, from your perspective, drill down into how the local communities are coping. You're based in North Kordofan, but you go around the Kordofans, and of course they have been very much at the epicenter of the conflict of late. And you have a particular focus on women-led organizations, because you have said to me in the past that a lot of humanitarian efforts don't focus as much on the women-led organizations, and of course we know that the women and girls have suffered tremendously in this conflict. And so I wonder if you could tell us, from your perspective, how things are at the community level and what kind of assistance you need, because Sanusi has said that you're only getting a fraction of what you need.
First of all, the situation in Sudan, in Kordofan and in Sudan as a whole is very, very complicated. It's a very complicated situation in terms of security. As women-led emergency response rooms, we are faced with multiple challenges. We try to move people from these unsafe zones towards camps which are more safe. We try to actually initiate and consolidate our efforts through building safe spaces. We are working under very difficult circumstances and under a heightened sense of insecurity. We are faced with the challenges of dealing with grievous bodily harm, and to actually support the women. There is a huge influx of individuals within the camps. We have over 12,000 individuals within each camp, and it's extremely challenging for us to meet the needs of all people at all times. This is one of the primary issues that we're faced and the obstacles we're facing in heeding the needs of all the individuals who present themselves. We have been faced with the challenges of facing women who have had to deliver en route as they're fleeing protracted violence and extreme violence. Therefore, we've tried to mobilize to create clinics, clinics which are actually mobile, and to actually face the challenge of creating a setup under these very precarious and difficult security situations. People are subjected to violations at all times, and this is one of the challenges. We also know that multiple children have now been orphaned. They come to us as babes in arms, and we find it very difficult to actually take care of these children who have lost their parents during the war. The violations which we are confronted with for children who have been raped, children who are aged 5, children who are as young as 7, have been subjected to great traumatic experiences, and therefore we need to offer psychosocial support, and we need to actually provide for them from a legal perspective. So all these are multiple challenges which we're faced with.
Disturbing what you've said about the challenges that you face, particularly with the sexual assaults, which, of course, not only females are victims of those, but also we know that young boys. And I think it was one of your colleagues who told me about the suicides that are actually taking place with some of these young people because of what they have endured. Ahmed Suleiman, so just from a kind of geopolitical point of view, just give us where we are, because of course everybody's attention's diverted to events in the Middle East, but we were all a little bit hopeful last year when we saw that the Quad had come together in August, September with this, United States statement, the US, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates. And of course, the role of the external actors is something which a lot of people have talked about, focusing a lot on the UAE support, allegedly, for the RSF, but also there are many other players, Turkey and Iran itself and so on. So perhaps you could touch on whether there is even a glimmer of optimism about any possibility of resolving the conflict.
Thank you very much, Zainab. And I think, the testimony, the words of Sanusi and Ala are very strong. And I think it reminds us all that really the war that we're seeing is a war on the Sudanese people. Right? It's a counter-revolutionary war against the people of Sudan from all sides. And I can probably take that, into the broader regional equation as well. And we can say that, I think regional interests are critical to resolving this war. That is an absolute foundation, but they have also been blocking meaningful progress towards ending the war. And we can say that, in a number of different ways, both in terms of thinking about the arms that continue to flow in from regional stakeholders, countries, neighboring countries, but also through proxy from support through various states in the Arabian Gulf, through other states that are neighboring countries to Sudan. And there are very kind of growing signs about a kind of consolidation of competing regional alliances. You mentioned the United Arab Emirates, being one of the main countries which is reported to be supporting the Rapid Support Forces and providing them with not only arms but also human support, mercenary support to fight in this war, and also providing them with safe haven for their economic interests, which I think one of the things that is often lost in this war is the domestic capacity and the economic control of the warring parties, and how important that is as two-way networks to continue to sustain the war. And these networks are regional. But recently, I think much more publicly since 2026 and under the surface before that, we've seen these wider developments in the MENA region, but also on the African continent, within the region that I focus on the Horn, which are reshaping some alliances or making public more alliances. We see assertive Saudi efforts to curtail the United Arab Emirates and its engagement in Sudan from a position where the Saudi government had been more neutral earlier on in the war, had hosted the Jeddah platform to try and mediate between the parties. And I think this ultimately, shows you how the increasing contestation and competition between the Saudis and the Emiratis has been directed towards the theatre of the war in Sudan. More broadly, we've seen, a kind of a consolidation of other alignments, Egypt, Turkey and Qatar kind of coming behind the Saudis. And on the other side, and this is more broadly in the Horn as opposed to directly in Sudan, we've seen the United Arab Emirates consolidating its relationships with the United Arab Emirates in the region as well. And I think this all is impacting the constellation of issues that we have in terms of both resolving the war in Sudan, which is being constrained by these Arab priorities, but also I think we shouldn't look beyond the concerns around a wider regional conflict within this region as well. Sudan's war is not a nation-state-based conflict. Its 7, borders are all impacted by this war. One in particular, the border with Ethiopia and with Eritrea, has a real risk of a much broader regional conflagration. And I think that's something that policymakers really have to be concerned about. That what we're seeing now, how desperate and how bad the war is in Sudan, could potentially become even worse if the two conflicts are combined.
Annalisa Dodds, so you were International Development Minister until about 18 months ago or so. So looking at it from the political perspective, we hear that efforts to try to bring about some humanitarian ceasefires, at least to establish humanitarian corridors, seems to be the priority of the international community, while the diplomatic talks still carry on with the Quad, with Masoud Boulos, of course, Tiffany Trump's father-in-law, leading the way for the Americans, although we understand that he's not seen as an honest broker. He's seen as being more pro-UAE rather than, neutral. So that has kind of stymied efforts. But just from a political point of view, it is rather messy. You've got the United Nations on the one hand recognising al-Burhan as the sort of government of Sudan, the African Union is saying not. The UK now is trying to work with Norway and other EU countries to try to get some kind of unity and so on. So I wonder if you could just give us, from your perspective, what you think, what's the trajectory like at the moment, diplomatically speaking?
Well, the trajectory so far has not been a productive one. It's been one of too much fragmentation, many attempts and different configurations of countries that see the appalling humanitarian situation and are trying to do something about it, but ultimately too little progress. And of course, others have remarked upon the fact that this is a conflict that has not been hitting the headlines globally. That, of course, has been the case in the UK as well. I've welcomed the fact that Yvette Cooper has said she wants to make a priority of Sudan, but that is in a context where there's very little understanding, I think, of it here in the UK. I think there are, of course, opportunities. We have to seek to seize them with the Berlin conference that's coming up. Again, another conference like the London conference last year, falling around the time of the anniversary of the conflict beginning. That is, of course, against a backdrop where you've had the Quad's initiatives. There's also now a so-called Quint, which is actually trying to kind of pull together some of the disparate efforts, including, for example, the EU and Africa Union. I think the absolute imperative, however, is to drive the political will into these mechanisms, because we know that the humanitarian need is not being covered, both because of a lack of means being provided, but also, of course, because the belligerents are all flouting humanitarian law continuously. They are persecuting continuously those seeking to support the humanitarian needs of the population, including members of the ERRs who've been often subject to attacks from both sides, actually consecutively, just for seeking to be neutral. There are those widespread violations of norms around conflict-related sexual violence, as you mentioned, and huge amounts of displacement, and yet we still don't see that breakthrough. So my understanding is, and I obviously don't speak for the UK government anymore, but that the government's focus is particularly on arguing for civilian engagement and representation, and that has been something that the UK government has been involved with for some time, trying to say this cannot be a process only for the generals, only for the belligerents who are at the root of this conflict, of course, in the first place. Also, to try and ensure that particularly the situation of women and girls is not forgotten. But naturally, I think a lot of that is going to be achieved through trying to put pressure on the US to stay engaged, to increase that engagement, even with the challenges that you mentioned, and also to involve the African Union as much as possible. And my understanding is that UK government ministers have been meeting with them repeatedly to try and encourage that. But that is in a context, of course, where there are many interests that are involved, and there is that complexity, as was just mentioned.
I mean, I know you don't speak for the government, but I mean, it seems that the UK government has this policy of equidistance between the SAF, the Sudan Armed Forces, and the RSF, and that it's, you know, a plague on both your houses, as it were. And although the government, working, as I said, with Norway and the EU and the Quad, is trying to get these humanitarian corridors, and our understanding is that the RSF have said, yes, okay, fine, we'll have these humanitarian corridors, but SAF has said, but we want them, they've set certain conditions, we want the RSF to withdraw and so on and so forth. So really, you know, the whole thing is frozen. So everybody says, we want to alleviate the suffering of the civilians and help, you know, the people that both Ala and Sanusi have described on the ground. And yet it just seems to be, you know, everything is in deadlock. Is it time to perhaps review this policy of equidistance or whatever? I'm just being devil's advocate here.
I mean, I feel, I realise this is a probably very contested position, but I feel if there was a perception the UK was ignoring atrocities which had been committed by either side, that would reduce its ability to try and exercise leverage on the situation, and that it's important to be alive to the abuses that have occurred by a number of parties. I think personally that's very important. But I also think, and what you just said, Zainab, underlines this, that bureaucratic means are being used continuously for political ends. Of course, this is not the only humanitarian context where we have seen this in conflict, where we're seeing claims that, of course, aid could be provided if permission was asked for, if somebody else was asked, if it was a full moon on a Tuesday or whatever, and it never happens. And the reality is people not having enough food to eat, people expiring because they don't have the shelter that they need. That's the reality of that bureaucracy. It's extraordinarily cruel, and it's only through the efforts, really, of those involved in the emergency response rooms and others that there is that support for the population in those circumstances.
Sanusi, what do people like you and Ala, what would you like to see from the international community?
Any action, really.
Any action to resolve the conflict, or are you just solely focused on the humanitarian, delivering humanitarian?
I mean, I think the ideal situation is this war needs to end. Every day this war is continuing. It's every day that we're losing people. It's like another day that our children are not going to school. It's another day that infrastructure is being destroyed. It's another day that we kind of getting into this cycle now of poverty and diseases and displacement and instability. I think I genuinely don't think that the situation in Sudan is that complicated. It is hard, but it's not impossible to solve. And I think,
then go on, how? Is it so simple?
It's really not so simple, but it's not like impossible, like people making it to be.
So what steps
if
do
we
you
said,
think should be taken that are not being taken?
I think using all available methods to engage into this towards ending this conflict effectively. Uniting platforms. We get repetition of all these different mediation is actually not solving, it's actually harming and actually dividing and then kind of creating more wedges out there. Uniting platforms, come together, use the diplomatic pressure, use the humanitarian, and use other means to actually make sure that people sit down and solve this problem. We're Sudanese at the end of the day. And I think, we've seen back, 20, maybe 30 years ago, every war started in Africa ended up at some table. And that there is no, the fact that, people are waiting for one side to kind of maybe win this war, it's not going to make any peace. And I think, if you talk to the Sudanese, they will literally tell you, the number one, enemy right now is the war itself. Because no matter who's shooting the AK, a civilian dies.
Mm. So, Ala, we heard about the atrocities that have taken place and so on, and what we often hear is that, one way of trying to encourage people to put down their arms is by saying, look, there is no impunity to the kind of atrocities which are taking place, to incentivize them and say, you are going to be held accountable. And we hear that there are people on the ground, Sudanese people, who are documenting these atrocities. I wonder if you're aware of such efforts, and you yourself, what do you think in terms of accountability? Do you really think that the kind of victims you deal with are going to see some kind of justice in the future?
I think that there is absolutely no movement. I think that the local communities in Sudan are unable. We have documented all the violations. Everybody has seen these violations. People know what's happened in Fashir. People know what's happened to children. We know that the hospitals have been bombarded. We know that schools have been bombarded. We know that people are seeking refuge and unable to find it. The Sudanese people know, and the whole world knows, but people are acting, they are not acting, they are staying static, and we don't know whether there is a lack of volition or whether they are incapable of doing anything. We don't know if they're actually hearing our voices. We are suffering. We know they don't understand how extreme our suffering is. So I don't know if they're actually able to take any steps.
So, thank you for that, Ala. When you hear that kind of, account, Ahmed, so, the idea that accountability and you can't do things without impunity, which is often, talked about in the context of Sudan, is it really going to have any sense? I mean, we've seen some individuals named, not the two principal leaders, Al-Burhan or Hemeti, because the idea is there's got to be some kind of exit strategy for them. Yeah. Perhaps exile in Saudi Arabia, a la Idi Amin, so many years ago. But, what incentives and disincentives can be given to the warring parties to stop?
Yeah, I think that's
down their arms.
That's critical to ending the war. These pragmatic conversations and the channels for those with the warring parties are absolutely crucial. And I think that when we're looking at incentives, obviously they at the moment hold the majority of the cards when we're talking about territory, armed forces and arms, economic wealth, connected to the resources of Sudan, be that gold, be that livestock, gum arabic, all of these resources that are not being used to build the country, but that are being used to destroy the country. And that, I think, needs to be reframed. Like, we really have to consider how to incentivize, how to provide off-ramps for some of these individuals, and their institutions, and how they should be reformed over the longer period. I mean, saying there is a need for some form of security sector reform in Sudan is not, it's an oversimplification, but I think, working towards that and the pragmatic realities of that, we only have to look back to the transition in 2018, from 2019 to the coup, to understand the level of complexity and the entrenched networks that need to be uprooted and the time that it will take. If we're being realistic, we're looking at a much longer term generational transition for Sudan, and really planning through what that looks like now is imperative. I think one thing I'd like to say about how do we get there? It's through greater coordination of efforts. Annalise talked about the fact that there are these multiple efforts. In Sudan, you don't even have one coalition. It's not just the Quad. It's the Troika, the Quad, the Quartet, the Quintet. Sorry, but what we don't see is how these are connected together and how they support each other to build the steps required, first for humanitarian truce, then for ceasefire, discussions with the warring parties, elevation of civilian priorities beyond armed actor priorities. And to do that, you need a credible political process that is inclusive of Sudanese civilians and their kind of wide spectrum of interests. That is missing, the connectivity and the sequencing of these processes. And part of that has to do with competition between some of the countries that you mentioned earlier on, European member states, the United States, their approach, the lack of communication, and in fairness, there have been efforts more recently to work around those. But if we're looking at the Quad mechanism, for example, that is a mechanism which by its very essence is to negotiate concessions and differences between Egypt, the United States, United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia on the way forward. That, if it's purely there to focus on the ceasefire and the interests of the regional parties and how they connect to the warring parties in Sudan, needs to connect to a broader effort. And I think that's what we're missing at the moment. Hopefully Berlin can be the impetus for that, because without that, we have no next step that we know about. So really, the emphasis of all stakeholders, all government, non-governmental stakeholders, is to make this process work. And I say this, I kind of make this determined point now because of the environment that we're in, because of the multiplicity of crises that we're trying to deal with in the international community, because of the reality that Sudan is bumped further down the priority list by the war in Iran. And is also going to be impacted because of that war directly. So I think that, really this is an opportunity, it is a time, and there needs to be a kind of a real political will, as Annalise was saying, and it's a moment in which we can galvanize towards a much more coordinated process that can meet those interests that you were talking about.
Just very quickly, because I'm going to go to the floor in a minute for questions, but you said the war in Iran, which will have an impact on the conflict in Sudan. I mean, now that the UAE and Saudi Arabia are on the same side in that conflict, could that help Sudan?
I think it's too early to say, really, in my honest view. I think very clearly there has been increased coordination amongst the GCC states and an emphasis on, a brotherly response amongst those Gulf states to what's happening in the war in Iran. Whether that translates to other geostrategic priorities, including the Red Sea, including Sudan, I think it's probably too early to say. We can be hopeful that that's the case in terms of the broader picture and trajectory, but I think the shorter term impacts are likely to be as difficult for Sudan to respond to and the international community to respond to in terms of, limited prioritization, which we're seeing having a direct impact on the Quad mechanism.
Okay. So Annalisa Dawes, just very quickly picking up what Sanusi said, that it's simple. Perhaps the international community with their efforts could simplify things by, instead of saying they want to do everything all at once, it's just to prioritize ending the war, which is what the people of Sudan want. Things like, the ethnic disparities in the makeup of the government, getting gender equality and all these things, which are nice things and important things to do, but perhaps the sequencing could be that they are, because these are things that have plagued Sudan since whenever, the role of the army in politics has governed Sudan since independence for all but 10 years. The fact that it's the riverine northern elite who've dominated politics and public life in Sudan is something that's been there for decades and decades. Instead of trying to do all that at the same time as, ending the war, just focus on ending the war and talk about these things later.
Yeah, I think to be fair to the Quad, that kind of phased approach, what they've described as a roadmap, is exactly what they were attempting to set out. Obviously, with the contradictions and challenges of the countries that are involved, as we've just been talking about. If we're trying to somehow find a reason to be more potentially optimistic about the situation, I personally was pleasantly surprised to see some of the countries that are members of the Quad actually acknowledging that there had been atrocities committed by different sides of the conflict, that there had been hunger in Sudan, that was actually made explicit in a way that we hadn't seen those parties acknowledging, unfortunately, previously. But obviously we had that Quad declaration, we've had the continued diplomacy, and the situation really hasn't got any better for people subject to that conflict, and we're still seeing the kind of appalling events that were just talked about. So we do, of course, need to focus on ending the war, and I think that is, to be fair, where the focus of the international community is, but there needs to be a far stronger impulsion towards that end. And I suppose I would just end by saying I really do think key to this is being very clear, both about the broader security implications, which I agree with, but also about the appalling human impact of this. When I say to people, can you imagine everyone in this city of London, every single person being forced to flee their home? You can't really imagine it. Well, of course, that's how many people have been displaced in Sudan, and now many of them actually 3 or 4 times. So I think it is underlining the enormity of this crisis for the entire international community and the failure of that community so far to deal with it.
Thank you. Just some questions from the floor. Wait till the microphone gets to you. Hands up, please. And so I see Lindsay Hilson there, if you give one to Lindsay. And identify yourself or your organisation, gentleman there. Lindsay, you go ahead.
Hello, I'm Lindsay Hilson from Channel 4 News. First of all, congratulations to the ERRs on getting this very well-deserved prize. Maybe you'll get the Nobel next. Could you just tell us a little bit more about what you are able to do at the moment in the circumstance in which you find yourselves as the ERRs, and whether you want support from overseas, or whether you're better off just getting on and doing it yourselves, and if you do want support, what kind of support?
Ala, why don't you answer that first, and then Sanusi. عايزة تردي ولا لا؟ ما سمعت السؤال. Oh, a translation. Okay, Sanusi, if she's waiting for the translation, you pick it up. سمعت السؤال.
هسه بيسووا في شنو بيسووا كيف ولو محتاجين لدعم حد
محتاجين لمساعدة من الناس برا ولا لا؟
اوكي اكيد طبعا احنا بنكون محتاجين لدعم.
Of course, we need support. It's not just financial support. We don't want charity, we don't just medication. What we need is for people to actually hear us. We want people to hear us as we are living in Sudan in real time. It's not just a question of figures. It's not just a question of statistics about the violations. The issue transcends this. We need people to actually understand what's happening in Sudan. This is what we need. We need for people to have to hear us.
Online, are the emergency response rooms able to receive private funding or public donations for the work they do? Right. Is the UK government helping to channel support? So it links into Lindsay's question.
I'm going to start with a little bit framing here. So when we are here talking and speaking, we've never claimed that we're experts in anything, right? But what held us as emergency response rooms so far and as Sudanese people is that like our ability to not surrender our humanity and our ability to imagine a better tomorrow and the hope. Because without that hope that tomorrow is going to be better, none of this would be possible. And as human beings, we kind of tend to overcomplicate things. Sometimes it's a good way to solve a problem. But sometimes simplifying it and stripping it from all the additions and the philosophies we've added and just making it bare, like structure, simple idea, I'm going there, it's a solution. Instead of, adding other things and go this way. So that's what I'm saying. It's like we tend sometimes to complicate matters that actually doesn't need all this, So emergency response rooms, and thank you for the question, and thank you. The emergency response rooms, we started with support from diaspora, with support from people within the neighborhoods. As the response expanded, as we got bigger, we leaned towards, partnerships and donors. And now we operate in the entire country in 18 states, cross-line under different area management, if you will. But yes, there's a lot of need. There's a lot of need in terms of, in some areas, because we're responding through cash to many areas, thereby allowing communities the agency to design and implement projects that make sense for them. In other areas, cash would not even cut it because you need actual in-kind inside that area, which is, these are the areas either under siege or either under siege or cut from markets. So there's a lot in those areas that needed from the external communities. We need support in terms of the protection of our volunteers on the ground. Our volunteers are the first line of response, and when they're targeted, when they're hit by drones or shellings or stray bullets, it hinders our effort to provide for our people, for our communities. So these three areas are where mostly we need support from outside. Flexible, trusted fund to these structures that have been built and proven for 3 years that mutual aid in this sense works in Sudan. And yes, and every advocacy we wanted, obviously, it's a hope that the war ends, and we want it to end. So
you mentioned the role of the diaspora, and what I would say to you, Lindsay, is that the role of the diaspora has been critical in providing funds. And in fact, I can see several members of the diaspora here, set up something called Humanitarian Action for Sudan, completely staffed by volunteers, people like Dr. Hussam al-Mujammar, Dr. Eva Khair, Fathia Abdullah, we've actually raised money and sent money to Allah to help her with her work in Kurdistan and, and many others. So the role of the diaspora has been absolutely critical because, of course, they're motivated. They don't need reward or anything except to see people helped. There was the gentleman there with the microphone.
Hello.
Briefly, if you would, because we're running out of time, and also panel, if you could keep
My
your
name is
responses
Aral
short.
Dut, a Mo Ibrahim scholar, and also a research assistant at Mo Ibrahim Foundation. So I would like to ask 2 questions, if you may
But
permit
quickly,
me.
if you could, because we've only
yes.
got 12 minutes.
Quickly. So one goes to Hamid Soliman. You did mention Eritrea and Ethiopia when you're talking about the conflagration, but then I would like to understand where South Sudan sits within the conflict ecosystem.
Right.
Second question goes to Al-Hassan. He did say we tend to complicate things even when they are not complicated. But then there is one complication that my mind has, and maybe you may simplify it. So we have guarantors who are viewed as those that have conflicted interests. They are peacemakers, they are also patrons, and to some extent they are also rivals. So how then do you deal with these conflicts of interest of those who are seen on one side as, having taken side, and then on the other side as having taken side, yet they are trying to create a platform where they can bring both of these parties? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So Ahmed Suleiman, quickly on the role of South Sudan.
Well, I think we need another event talking about South Sudan. We can't, kind of reduce it to a comment, but, it's extremely worrying what's taking place in the country and the slide of South Sudan back into civil war. Of course, this is completely connected with the situation in Sudan because the two used to be part of the same country. And of course, there is a huge border connecting the two. There is a lot of commonality between the populations, and there are a lot of interests, politically speaking, as well. So I think, very briefly, what we've seen is South Sudan being dragged into this war. They've of course had to receive hundreds of thousands of refugees coming in, many South Sudanese citizens and of South Sudanese origin. But it's also been complicated due to the transnationality of this war. The fact that militia groups are able to use the borders in flux, both to move arms, both to move soldiers for rest and respite, for training, has hugely complicated this war and taken South Sudan into this conflict. And from a regional perspective as well, President Kiir at the outset tried to remain very neutral in this war. In fact, offered their regional role to help and resolve the conflict between the warring parties. But it's been very complex for them to stay neutral because of these regional dynamics, because of the economic situation in the south, having lost the export of its oil, much of the export of its oil. It has been looking for external patrons to help to provide economic support for the government. And that has, I think, drawn South Sudan far away from that neutral position. So the war is clearly having a detrimental impact on South Sudan and complicating its own domestic political crisis.
There was a question about Somalia as well, or the fractured parts of Somalia, and you'd already mentioned how they've been part of the supply chain of weapons and mercenaries. That was one question there. Sanusi, on the...
Very tough question.
Yeah.
I mean, the question actually needs, a whole institute to answer this. But I think, and I don't know the answer, just to be honest. I've never claimed to be an expert in this. But my preach is this: it shouldn't be that either peace kills politics or politics kills peace. Like there's supposed to be a line and a sequencing that allow us to get to peace, and then meet interest of either internal or external back us into this war, and then lead us into maybe some sort of a political process and a transition. We can't untangle all this and try to do it now, and it's actually at the expense of civilians. This is the one advocacy I have. We need to save our people. It won't be people. if this war continues any longer. So, yeah.
All right, I'll just take some very rapid questions and I'll take 3 at a time. Just the microphone here, microphone there, and then this lady here. That may all be time. Very briefly, briefly if you would, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Ammar Hamada, British with Sudanese origins. I'm here to say congratulations for the emergency rooms, and also thank you, Chatham House, for having this about Sudan and making or widening the presence of Sudan during this very tough time. My question here is for the MB. Yes, when we're talking to civil societies or any other actors, we're talking about how they can make help for those people and how to make it easy for those who are fled or displaced. But when we are talking with the governments, we will ask for ending the war because it's the root cause. We do not want to go for asking to treat the symptoms while we are in the middle of a very tough war. Now, what we can see is now maybe we want more pressure from the UK government for those who are spoiling or even making the course to ending war very difficult. But we are seeing little of this.
So you're talking about you want more pressure from the UK government on the external actors?
Yes, in a very obvious way.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that's one question. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you very much, all the distinguished panelists. I am Dr. Isia Koshito Al-Mustafa, Senior Lecturer at the Clotina Business School, University of West London, and a port consultant on issues on African governance. My questions are 2, but very quick one.
Very quick.
First one.
Your introduction was virtually a question.
First one is the Gum Arabic. Gum Arabic is key to Sudan as an export raw materials for Western nation. Now, this has been found to be key in financing this civil war. I'm asking the MP from the UK, yes, yourself, madam, former minister, could you tell us how can developed nation or Western nation, particularly England, can stop this supply chain to be clean?
Thank you.
Second is yourself, the researcher from Sudan at the Chatham House. Could you tell us how can international community have failed to protect Sudan? You know that the London Action Plan was last year or so. What is the outcome? Is it the issue of people favoritism about your country should keep on devastating, and 50 million people at the minute are disadvantaged, displaced, even though you mentioned 10 million people now are as refugees. People are dying. Can we stop this, please? Thank you.
And was it the lady there, right there? Yeah. Oh, Fatia. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, with Chatham House Leadership Program. So just very quickly building up on your point, Ahmed, that this is a time of an opportunity possibly. And if so, then do you see a mechanism possibly to enhance the civilian voice in this opportunity and even possible the call for a civilian transition? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Fatia Abdullah, microphone, and then the gentleman there. And
really, I'm seeing this as a very positive moment because Sudan is there and it's really difficult on ground, as I told us. But this is really a positive moment. ERRs receiving the prize, and we are happy from Humanitarian Action for Sudan to be supporting you. Seeing Ala as a female here is really fantastic, and this is a great opportunity. Ala, you spoke about the voice of women on ground, and I just want to ask, how do you want us to raise the voice of women in Sudan, because as Annalisa and all of you, Zainab, and all of you spoke about atrocity of women and girls of Sudan, they're not getting justice at all. The voice is not being heard. What else innovatively can we do? I'm focusing on women and girls who are affected more. No justice, no support for them. What else can we do now for all of us?
Fatia Abdullah
Thank you.
has done so much for HAS, and she's a person with a great deal of experience from conflict areas like Syria, Yemen, Somalia, and so on. And really, I salute her for everything she does. And especially, we're very happy and lucky to have you on Humanitarian Action for Sudan. She works non-stop. Thank you. Yes, gentleman there.
Thank you very much indeed. My name is Ahmed Ashai. I run the Sudanese program at Oxford. I think Annalisa has hinted about the diaspora outside. We haven't so far attended to the issue of 2 million Sudanese in Cairo, 8 million displaced. There are people in Ethiopia, in Kenya, in Kampala, and in Chad. Those people lost their jobs, they lost their possession, they lost their bank account, they are living on handout from relatives. Those are very fundamental for the future of Sudan. How we are going to fix that?
So, and before we end, I just want to ask Samo Ibrahim, who is, of course, prominent Sudanese, who's done so much behind the scenes to help the people of Sudan, whether you have a question or whether you want to make a comment before I come to the panel for the end.
Yes, I think the most important thing, the overriding issue here, is stop the fighting. Because we cannot support the humanitarian effort unless we stop the fighting. We work with UN, and they were telling me, out of 10 trucks, we managed, after so much harassment, to get permission to get it into the country. Only 3 trucks arrive at the camps. Now, we cannot find drivers who even accept to do it because it's so dangerous. So we cannot support those 10 million people, the intelligence space, unless we stop the war. To stop the war, we need 2 things to be done, or 3 things actually. The first thing, you need to stop the supply of weapons. There are 7 or 8 countries where everybody knows them who are supplying the weapons, and we need to put that out clearly there. This country and this country and this country, you are killing our people. Those guys must stop. Second thing, we need to stop the financial process which enable people to get the weapons. Gold, Arabic gum, this has been smuggled, okay? And this is the money also which support the war. And that is something the international community can do. Those wonderful people in US or whoever who say, okay, if you don't do that, sanctions. And we want the European Union, United States, to have the backbone to say, you 7 countries stop doing that, unless, the financial institutions stop any transaction of money for these boards, for these entities. That they can do. That is a very simple action. Unfortunately, we are losing what used to be the decent international community, rule of law, and it's becoming a jungle. And we see these middle countries now, everybody is throwing their weight around. We need really some action. And we need, those guys will not act without pressure.
And what was the third thing? We all
need to make noise.
What was the third thing?
To put pressure on all these people to say, guys, we need some decency. That's what we need.
And the third thing, you said 2 things. Oh, maybe you did them all. Yeah, you did. Thank you very much, Dr. Mo Ibrahim. So that's it. We've run out of time. I want the panel just to make their final comments. We had the point about gum Arabic. We'll just take that. Mo has addressed that. We know that Sudan accounts for, I think, 90% of the world's gum Arabic. We had the question about civilians and what pressure can be brought on the external actors, the point that Mo just underscored there. And then the refugees, although of course, it's a huge problem, but I think the focus of this has been mostly the war in Sudan, and of course the refugees are in a terrible situation, but they don't have to bear the brunt of the kind of things which our panel have talked about. So I'll go along this way. Pick any of those answers that you want to do, a minute each, and that's it. Sanusi.
I think most of the questions were directed on that end of the table. But
just your closing thought.
But thank you, Mr. Mo Ibrahim, for that. Saying it's simple is not. I don't think it's a naive thing to say. It's just it needs courage, it needs will, it needs courage to actually do it. And this is, it may not be an answer to the question, but it's something I really need to say. I think the emergency response rooms in Sudan right now activated communities and turned them into designers and deliverers of their own, and architects of their own survival. So it's a good case study to, to aid that is being designed from within, to communities that are coming together to support one another with or without international support. That's a good key. And it needs to be, these structures need to be supported so that they can move into resilience and then move into development later, and make sure that we end that cycle of humanitarian aid again and again and again. So we get people into a stage where they could actually get out of that.
You've set up a new model which is also locally owned, without outsiders coming and dictating how the aid is dispersed. Thank you, Sanusi. على آخر كلمة عندك عايزة تقولي إيش عن
Okay. أنا حجاوب على كلام أستاذة فتحية.
I'm going to respond to Fathiya's question. The first thing that we need as Sudanese women, we need our voices to be heard. We need roles to be visible, and we need to avoid being erased. We need to have the recognition that our voices have been eradicated for long enough, and we have our voices, and we should have the right to express ourselves, and that the women have specific needs, that women put their needs to the side. So therefore, we need a specific fund for women, for women's needs, and for women's needs, and for children's needs. Because the funds that we get, we only get 4% of all the money that's allocated. So therefore, it's very important for women to actually have a fund which is designated for their specific needs, specifically so that we're not drowned out within these bigger projects.
Dangerous to her own personal safety in carrying out her mission. I really, want to say just what a courageous woman she is, traversing in very difficult situations. Annalisa, yes. Absolutely. Annalisa Dodds, so there were some points which were...
Yes, and I'll try and deal with as much of them as I can in 1 minute. I mean, I strongly agree. Obviously, this is not a technical crisis. It's a political crisis because of conflict, and it's a man-made crisis. And I use that old-fashioned phrase advisedly, obviously. This, therefore, has to be dealt with, above all, with that imperative of stopping the conflict. And clearly, it's then linked to the humanitarian crisis, because Sudan has so much richness in terms of agriculture, huge resources that, as we were talking about previously, should be there for the people of Sudan, rather than funding this appallingly destructive war. So I strongly agree with that. In terms of the point about arms, I mean, of course, in theory, there's meant to be an embargo that's meant to be being applied. So I couldn't agree more with that point, and much else that was said. And just finally, a word on supply chains and gum arabic, but also, of course, gold as well. The UK is coming into the presidency of the Financial Transparency Task Force, so-called FATF, later on this year. I think it's going to be incredibly important for us to use that job in a way that is not siloed. We need to have much more transparency. We need to understand where actually, for example, gold is being traded, and it appears to be often traded by the belligerents in UAE, but different side. But we need to understand what's going on there. We need to make it transparent, and we need to stop, ultimately, supply chains that are, well, really stealing from the Sudanese people in order to further this war. So I hope that my country's government will be pushing extremely hard on that in the months to come.
Thank you very much. And very quickly, Ahmed Suleiman, I don't know, we didn't have the civilian question addressed.
Yes, I'll try and wrap it round. Yeah. I think you know, obviously on the regional context, you know, what's happening in the Gulf at the moment, in the broader Middle East, perhaps might create a bit of understanding. I think also Europe, the UK has been very strong in supporting GCC states under this crisis, and perhaps some of that relationship influence can be used to help to leverage a coordinated effort to try and end the war in Sudan. So I believe in sticks. I think sticks are a hugely important part of this incentivization, but I also think, realistically speaking, we have to convince the regional states to come on board, and that for them a stable, conflict-free Sudan is better for their interests than a fragmented Sudan, which, you know, could split further. And on the civilian sides, it's very easy. We're seeing it here. We're seeing it today. The point of this award, you know, democracy lies within Sudan. Representation lies within the ERRs, within the Sudanese people. They need a mechanism to be able to express that and deliver their future, to create and craft their own future.
Thank you. Well, we are out of time now. All I can say is I sincerely hope that we will not be gathering for the 4th anniversary of this war at this time next year. Thank you to Ahmed, Annalisa, Ala and Sanusi. Thank you. Renewed congratulations to you on your prize, and Bronwyn Maddox, the CEO, Chief Executive of Chatham House, is going to be making that award once we've cleared the stage and the tables have been reassembled. But thank you very much from me. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Bronwyn Maddox, the Director and Chief Executive of Chatham House, and I am absolutely delighted that we are all gathered here this evening to award the 2025 Chatham House Prize to Sudan's emergency response rooms. That was a really fantastic panel that we had discussing it all and set us right up for this awards ceremony. Before I get into saying some things about the emergency response rooms, why we've awarded this prize and the prize itself, let me just make a particular thanks to those who have made this evening possible, particularly Dr. Mo Ibrahim, the Open Society Foundations and the Quadrature Climate Foundation, who've helped us not only have this evening, but bring over representatives of the emergency response rooms for this evening. And also all those, including the Chatham House staff and members, who took part in the nomination, which is a crucial part, and in the voting process, and to all the staff who helped this evening, including Zara Berry, a member of our senior management team who introduced the evening. Thanks to them all. So to the prize itself. This is a prize that carries the collective judgment of our Chatham House community. It's nominated by Chatham House staff who come up with suggestions from right round the world. Our presidents have a say on it. It's voted on by our members, and it's presented on behalf of our patron, His Majesty the King. We launched it in 2005, and since then, the prize has honoured leaders and institutions who have stood out for their courage, their integrity, their impact. From Sir David Attenborough to President Volodymyr Zelensky, Médecins Sans Frontières, the Committee to Protect Journalists, Malawi's Constitutional Court judges, and last year's recipient, Prime Minister Donald Tusk, recognized for his role in restoring democracy and the rule of law in Poland. So, to understand why the emergency response rooms are being honored this year, we must be clear about the context in which they work, and we've heard quite a bit about that in the past hour. For nearly 3 years, Sudan has been engulfed in a devastating war, principally between the Sudanese Armed Forces and the Rapid Support Forces and their allied coalitions. This conflict has triggered what is now the world's largest humanitarian crisis. Since April 2023, more than 11 million people have been forcibly displaced. Over 4 million have fled across borders to neighboring countries. 34 million people, around 70% of Sudan's population, now need humanitarian assistance. These are not just numbers, they are families, communities, and futures which have been placed under impossible strain. This conflict has shattered civilian infrastructure, hospitals, schools, water, power stations, the very fabric of everyday life. In many areas, state institutions no longer function in any meaningful way. Basic services that people might once have taken for granted, underpinning their safety, their healthcare, their livelihoods, have become scarce or entirely absent. And it is in this extraordinarily harsh environment that Sudan's emergency response rooms have emerged as a lifeline. They did not wait for permission. They didn't wait for the perfect plan or the ideal conditions. They stepped into the vacuum left by collapsing institutions and restricted international access, and they got on with the work of keeping people alive. They have meant the difference between life and death for many Sudanese. They provide food, clean water, and medical supplies in areas that are often inaccessible to international organizations. They help maintain and repair infrastructure, from power lines to water systems. They organize evacuations from areas under bombardment and siege. They design and implement projects that support women, children, and other vulnerable groups. I thought that was a particularly moving bit of that panel discussion. They pay attention not only to immediate survival, but to dignity and social cohesion. And they do all this while living in the same conflict as those they are working for. Their volunteers are exposed to shelling, displacement, and hunger. They face harassment, obstruction, sometimes attack from the warring parties. And one of the most striking aspects of the emergency response rooms is their insistence on impartiality. They provide assistance to all those caught up in the conflict, regardless of political alignment, ethnicity, or region. For us here at Chatham House, this prize is also a statement of our concern. Sudan's war must not be allowed to stay in the background of the world's attention. So this evening, we honor the emergency response room's courage, creativity, and persistence. We also honor through them the millions of Sudanese who are enduring this war with extraordinary fortitude. It is our hope that this prize brings greater visibility to their work, greater protection for their volunteers, an absolutely crucial point that their representatives have made to us, and greater urgency to international efforts to end the war and the suffering of the Sudanese citizens. It is now my great honour to hand over to Sir Simon Fraser, the Chair of Chatham House, who's going to read a letter from His Majesty the King. Simon.
Thank you very much, Bronwyn. And it's a great privilege to be here, and a particular privilege for me to read this personal message from His Majesty King Charles on this occasion. As the patron of Chatham House, I would particularly like to congratulate Sudan's emergency response rooms on being awarded the Chatham House Prize, in recognition of the vital humanitarian support they are providing to communities affected by the devastating conflict in Sudan. Despite terrible risks to their own safety and amid unimaginable suffering, the courageous volunteers operating within these inspiring community-led networks are providing essential aid, support, healthcare, and protection for others. Their dedication and compassion offer a shining example of the proud Sudanese tradition of shared community action, of nafir, and a beacon of hope that will not be forgotten. I send my warmest and most heartfelt good wishes to the worthy winners of this prestigious award. The safety and welfare of the Sudanese people remain very much in my thoughts in such desperately difficult and dangerous circumstances. Charles R. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Simon, for sharing those words with us. And I am now pleased to present the 2025 Chatham House Prize to Sudan's emergency response rooms. Their representatives like to come up. So, let me give one of you that. And one of you hold it. Great. Let's have it. Come here and let's all have a photograph. We need to get closer together.
Oh. Can we move a little bit? Just give us space. A little bit. Yes. Let's take it.
Should be one good one.
Yes, please. All right, one more. Right.
Yes. Thank you. Maybe just stay with me. I need the courage. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, members of Chatham House Institute, designated guests, colleagues, and friends, families. We accept this honor with deep humility and profound gratitude. This recognition, we receive it not as individuals, not as an organization in the conventional sense, but as collective expression of over 26,000 Sudanese volunteers who refused to be victimized nor disappear in the face of war. The emergency response rooms were not born in conference halls or policy briefs, but in neighborhoods under bombardment, in homes turned into health clinics, in streets where volunteers organized food, water, evacuation, and information while the state collapsed around them. We represent Sudanese communities responding to crisis with dignity, with agility and speed, and unshakable belief that lives must go on even in the darkest times. This prize belongs first and foremost to the volunteers, to the women,
It belongs to the women and men who coordinated aid under fire, to the doctors and nurses who worked without salaries or safety, to organizers who negotiated access with nothing but hope and trust, and to the communities who protected one another when no one else could. Many of them could not be here tonight. Some are displaced, some are imprisoned, some have been killed. This honor is theirs. Their courage is carried into this room by a few of us today and by those who are watching from home. This recognition from Chatham House matters deeply, not because it validates our suffering, but because it recognizes different way of understanding the power of solidarity, governance, and mutual aid. The experiences of those communities, of those community networks demonstrate that people are not merely beneficiaries of aid, they are leaders, first responders, and architects of their own survival. For decades, global systems have been speaking about localization, but in Sudan, localization was not a policy choice. It was not a policy choice. It was a necessity. When institutions failed, communities organized. When borders closed, networks opened. When violence tried to fragment society, mutual aid stitched it back together. This prize is also a reminder of responsibility. This recognition must not stop at applauses. Sudan civilians continue to face famine, displacement, and violence. Emergency response rooms volunteers continue to operate with minimum resources, immense risks, and shrinking civic space. We see this award as a call to all of us to protect civic spaces in times of war, so that they remain the baseline to rebuild and transform Sudan. It's a call to place communities not at the margin of decision-making, but at its center. To Chatham House, to King Charles, thank you. To Chatham House, thank you for listening, not only to institutions, but to the people of Sudan. Thank you for honoring this form of resilience and leadership that emerges from grassroots efforts. And to the people of Sudan, this recognition belongs to you. To the people of Sudan, this recognition belongs to you. Your courage, your care for one another, and your refusal to surrender your humanity continues to inspire the world. This prize is received in your name, and it will be carried back to the streets, to the neighborhood, and to the future you're still building. And thank you, and good night.
So, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. That brings to an end our prize award ceremony. It remains to say thank you all very much for coming and showing your support this evening to our very worthy winners, and thank you all for making the journey here and being here among us, and for everything you do, and for being here to receive the prize.